Hi, I'd like to take a quick minute to talk about the event object. This was discussed in this week's lecture, but you need to see it in action to get a real appreciation for what it does. Notice how I'm calling a function called myFunction, and I'm passing a variable called event. Now look at the rest of the script. Nowhere in here do we have this variable defined. So let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and create a script tag, and I'll write my function like this, and I can inherit that event and give it any variable. In this case, I'll just call it an E. So what I'm going to do is console.log this value so you can see it. And you remember when we did this lecture, there was a PreventDefault object. Well, I just clicked this button, and let's go ahead and make this larger, and then we're going to show all the elements of this event. We actually have the X and Y coordinates of where I clicked it. In fact, I can change this a little bit, and we can remove that and do this, and you see the X and Y changed. So when we open this up, we can see, and you'll see default prevented, and you see it's a false. So if I did e.preventDefault, like we did in the lecture, it would stop that event from bubbling or working down the levels. See the cancel bubble? With the event defaults, all future events that are dependent on this initial event would continue unless we prevent default. And that's what we're doing. So in this case, you can see the massive amount of information that is passed through here. What one of the most important things are when the event was clicked, also the type. The type is something you can evaluate to see if something happened. So a lot of themes from this week are inside this event. In fact, all the timeouts, the clear timeout and clear interval, those functions are all part of this event. It goes on and on and on. You have all the event listeners, but it's all this information that comes from this event object that lets us do things. For example, set timeout or set interval were never called. So how do we use this? Well, the event can be used for a lot of things because it has so much information. In this case, I could make sure that the button I anticipated, the sender, is exactly who I think it is. So you see the target button here? That's the button that was clicked. So the fact is that this event object is sort of amazing, and you'll see this a lot if you ever build kiosks with JavaScript, or if you do mobile app development. The fact is that I passed, and this has to be called event, but what you put here doesn't matter. It should be called info if you want. And then if we were to console.log info, it would contain the same elements. So the way you would grab these values would simply be to grab them as a property. For example, one of the things I like to always grab is the inner height, something like that. And inner width. That's the inner height and width of the screen. This gets everything from, and it's part of the view object. But things like that default prevented. If I were to console.log info.default prevented, oops, and you've got to just make sure that you pass the exact value, default prevented, and it is camel cased. So now when I hit refresh, like this, and I do this, I just get a false. So that's how you can access all the properties of that, and that's how you can run conditions to test against what you need. So that is the event object. Now in this week's lesson, we prevented the default by using PreventDefault. So it's PreventDefault, and you can pass it as 0 to make it the first element that you prevent. So when I hit console.log and I hit refresh again and do event object, I can I'm just going to go ahead and remove that 0 real quick and hit refresh, and there we go. It's undefined because it's a command. So this is one way of how to do it. Or you can just leave it open and it'll prevent default on the whole function. But this is if you want to have other events and stop at a certain point. I'm going to show you an example of when you would use this. I did a site a while back at my day job, and get some issues here with the CSS since I left. I no longer work there. But under capabilities, these elements right here, what we're doing is the particles here are moving around randomly, but I prevent the default when a new thing is clicked. So these other events, when I click here, would be stopped. So I'm preventing default all the way through. Anyway, that's an example of what you might use it for, and it's a good time to learn it now, right before we get into jQuery. So that's a little bit about the event object.